78 million sockeye salmon. That was the count in Bristol Bay during a single summer, the largest run of wild sockeye ever recorded on Earth. Tens of millions of fish, silver and red and driven by an ancient instinct, pouring from the North Pacific into rivers that have carried their kind for 10,000 years. Alaska. 586,000 square miles of mountains, tundra, glacier, and coast. More than 3 million lakes. Over 12,000 rivers. 6,640 miles of ocean shoreline. No other state comes close. And no other state on Earth holds this volume of wild, cold water fish and ecosystems that remain, for the most part, as they were before human industry arrived. This is not a place of stocked ponds or managed impoundments. Alaska's fisheries are defined by wildness, by water cold enough to numb bare hands, by runs of salmon so massive they alter the ecology of entire watersheds, by species that have adapted to conditions no hatchery can replicate. The state produces roughly 40% of the nation's surface water, and within that immense network swim fish that has shaped not only ecosystems but cultures, economies, and identities for millennia. The story of Alaska's cold water fish is, in many ways, the story of Alaska itself. It is a story of salmon, 5 species of Pacific salmon that migrate thousands of miles to return to the rivers where they were born. But it is also a story of rainbow trout grown to enormous proportions in waters fed by salmon carcasses. Of Arctic char painted in spawning colors, so vivid they seem impossible. Of grayling, with their sail-like dorsal fins, holding in streams that have never seen a road. And of lake trout, patrolling the frigid depths of lakes so remote they remain unnamed on most maps. From the turquoise waters of the Kenai to the vast drainage of the Yukon, from the salmon-choked rivers of Bristol Bay to the glacier-fed lakes of the interior, this is the story of Alaska's cold water fish, the species, the waters they depend on, and what it means to protect the last great wild fishery on the continent. Hello my friends, welcome to American Fishing Atlas. Subscribe to the channel, share and like. Thank you. No discussion of Alaska's cold water fish begins anywhere but with salmon. 5 species of Pacific salmon, Chinook, sockeye, coho, pink, and chum, define the ecological and cultural character of the state. Each arrives at different times, in different rivers, in different numbers. Together, they form the biological engine that drives Alaska's freshwater ecosystems. Chinook salmon, the kings, are the largest and the rarest. A mature Chinook can exceed 50 pounds, and on the Kenai River, one famously tipped the scale at 97 pounds and 4 ounces in 1985, a world record that still stands. These are the most prized fish in Alaska, sought by sport anglers, revered by subsistence communities, and commercially valuable beyond measure. Yet in parts of their range, particularly the Yukon River, Chinook numbers have collapsed. Returns that once averaged 375,000 fish per year have fallen to as few as 44,000, triggering a 7-year moratorium on nearly all Chinook fishing in the Yukon drainage. Sockeye salmon, the reds, are Alaska's most abundant and most commercially valuable species. Bristol Bay, in the state's southwest, produces the largest wild sockeye run on Earth. In 2022, over 73 million sockeye returned to the bay, shattering all previous records. The Kvichak River, flowing from Lake Iliamna, Alaska's largest lake at over 1,000 square miles, produces the single largest salmon run of any river on the planet. These fish are the foundation. When sockeye spawn and die in Bristol Bay's rivers, their ocean-gathered nutrients feed the soil, the vegetation, the insects, the trout, the bears, and ultimately the next generation of salmon. Coho, pink, and chum salmon complete the cycle. Coho, the silvers, arrive later in summer, aggressive and acrobatic, willing strikers of both fly and lure. A fresh coho in saltwater chrome, running hard against a tight drag, is one of Alaska's great angling experiences. They average 8 to 12 pounds, though fish in the mid-teens are taken regularly in systems like the Kenai and the Nushagak. Pink salmon, the smallest and most numerous, run in staggering numbers during even years, sometimes so thick in coastal streams that every cast finds a fish. Chum salmon, perhaps the most underrated of the five, travel deep into interior drainages and provide a critical late-season food source for both wildlife and subsistence communities. In the Yukon River, chum salmon once migrated over 1,000 miles inland, one of the longest freshwater journeys of any Pacific salmon. What makes Alaska's salmon runs ecologically extraordinary is not just their size, but their function. Salmon are nutrient pipelines. Born in freshwater, they spend years feeding in the rich waters of the North Pacific, accumulating marine-derived nitrogen and phosphorus in their bodies. When they return to spawn and die, sometimes by the millions in a single watershed, those ocean nutrients enter the freshwater ecosystem. Studies in Bristol Bay have shown that salmon carcasses enrich riparian vegetation, boost insect populations, and directly feed the trout, char, and grayling that resident anglers prize. Even the forests benefit. Trees growing near salmon streams have been found to contain measurably higher levels of marine-derived nitrogen than trees farther from the water. But Alaska's cold water story extends well beyond the 5 salmon species. Rainbow trout, known as steelhead in their sea-run form, thrive in the rivers of the Kenai Peninsula and the Bristol Bay drainage. In systems like the Kvichak and the tributaries around Lake Iliamna, rainbow trout grow to extraordinary sizes, feeding on the eggs and flesh of spawning salmon. Trophy rainbows exceeding 30 inches are not uncommon in these waters during late summer. The Kenai River alone supports upward of 34 fish species, and is widely regarded as the most popular fishing river in the state. Arctic char, Salvelinus alpinus, hold the distinction of being the northernmost freshwater fish on Earth. In Alaska, they range from Bristol Bay into the polar regions, thriving in conditions that would kill most other species. During spawning, their bellies ignite in shades of orange and crimson that seem painted rather than natural. Closely related are the dolly varden, abundant across the state's lakes and streams, providing year-round fishing opportunity. Most dollies range from 10 to 21 inches, though larger specimens exist in systems connected to salmon runs. Arctic grayling, Thymalus arcticus, are the hidden jewels of Alaska's freshwater. Distinguished by their enormous, fan-shaped dorsal fin marked with rows of iridescent spots, grayling inhabit cold, clear rivers and lakes across the interior and western regions. For many visiting anglers, grayling represent the essence of wild Alaska, a species that exists only where water is clean, cold, and undisturbed. Lake trout, northern pike, burbot, and sheefish round out Alaska's cold water community. Sheefish, found only in Arctic and subarctic waters, can reach impressive sizes and are pursued in remote drainages like the Kuskokwim and Kobuk. Each species occupies a distinct niche, and together they form a web of life that depends on one thing above all else: clean, cold, unobstructed water. Long before statehood, before Russian fur traders, before the first cannery processed its inaugural run, the people of Alaska had already built civilizations around cold water fish. For the Yupik, the Dena'ina Athabaskan, the Alutiiq, the Tlingit, and dozens of other Alaska native groups, salmon were not merely food. They were identity. The Yupik word Namberpak, meaning big lake, is the name they gave to Lake Iliamna. The Dena'ina called it Nilavina, Islands Lake. For these communities, the annual return of salmon was the organizing event of the year. Fish camps along riverbanks served as gathering places where families spent the long summer days catching, splitting, smoking, and drying salmon for the winter ahead. Knowledge of the rivers, of timing, of technique, all of it passed from generation to generation through practice, not textbooks. The spiritual dimension ran equally deep. Among many Alaska Native groups, the first salmon caught each season was honored in ceremony, blessed, consumed, and its remains returned to the water so its spirit might lead others home. This was not superstition. It was governance. It was a system of resource management rooted in reciprocity and sustained over thousands of years. The arrival of commercial fishing in the 1880s changed the calculus. By 1883, the first canneries operated in Bristol Bay. Within decades, industrial-scale harvest pushed salmon populations to dangerous lows. Fish traps, massive structures that captured entire runs, proved devastating. By 1953, overfishing had grown so severe that President Eisenhower declared Alaska a federal disaster area. The traps were eventually outlawed, and Alaska's Constitution, adopted at statehood in 1959, enshrined sustainable fisheries management as a founding principle. The commercial salmon fishery in Bristol Bay adapted. For the first 50 years, fishing boats were restricted to sail power. When that restriction lifted in 1951, diesel engines transformed the fleet within 7 years. A 32-foot boat length limit, established in the late 1920s, remains in effect today. These constraints, born of necessity, helped create the framework that now sustains one of the most productive and well-managed fisheries on the planet. National Geographic has recognized Bristol Bay as one of only 3 well-managed fisheries in the world. Sport fishing came later, but its impact has been transformative. The Kenai River emerged as a destination in the mid-20th century, and the 1985 world record Chinook cemented its reputation internationally. Today, the Kenai River Special Management Area encompasses over 105 miles of rivers and lakes, and the fishery generates hundreds of thousands of angler days annually. Fly fishing lodges now dot the shores of Lake Iliamna, the banks of the Kvichak, and the remote rivers of the Bristol Bay watershed. Alaska's sport fishing economy brings in hundreds of millions of dollars each year, with over 300,000 non-resident licenses sold annually. There is a particular quality to fishing Alaska that separates it from anywhere else in the lower 48. It begins with scale. A river like the Copper, 290 miles long, draining the Wrangell and Chugach Mountains into the Gulf of Alaska, produces over 2 million salmon annually. Its delta stretches across 700,000 acres, the largest contiguous wetland on the Pacific coast of North America. Standing on its banks, a person confronts not just water, but a system so vast it defies the usual reference points. On the Kenai, the experience is different, more accessible, but no less powerful. The river's turquoise water, colored by glacial flour from the Harding Icefield, flows 82 miles from Kenai Lake to Cook Inlet. The upper river demands drift boats and skilled guides to navigate swift currents through a corridor of spruce forest. The middle section, flowing through the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge, holds the legendary rainbow trout that gorge on salmon eggs each fall, fish that guides call Jurassic for their size and power. The lower river opens wider, deeper, where the massive late-run Chinook move through in July and August. Brown bears fish the same banks. Bald eagles line the cottonwoods overhead. Moose wade the shallows at dawn. In the Bristol Bay drainage, the experience shifts again toward true wilderness. Most waters here are reached only by floatplane. A bush pilot drops anglers on a gravel bar beside a nameless tributary, and for the next several hours, the only sounds are current, wind, and the splash of fish. The rivers of the Togiak National Wildlife Refuge, the Nushagak Drainage, the streams feeding Lake Iliamna. These are places where Arctic char strike aggressively in their spawning colors, where grayling rise to dry flies on water so clear the river bottom appears magnified, where rainbow trout that have never seen a hatchery pellet chase mouse patterns along undercut banks. The seasonality of Alaska fishing is as important as the geography. The calendar begins in May, when the first Chinook push into the Copper River and the Kenai. June brings the early king runs, and the start of the sockeye migration. July is the peak, millions of sockeye flooding into Bristol Bay, silvers beginning to show, the rivers at their fullest. August and September shift the focus to trophy rainbows, fattened on salmon eggs, and to the Lake Coho runs that extend into October in some systems. Each window is brief. Each demands precise timing. What draws anglers back, year after year, flight after flight, thousands of miles from home, is not any single species or any single river. It is the combination, the cold, the vastness, the wildness, the knowledge that these fish are doing what their ancestors have done since the last ice age, in water that has not yet been dammed, diverted, or degraded beyond recognition. It is the fog lifting off a river at 5 in the morning to reveal a grizzly feeding 30 yards upstream. It is the sound of a reel screaming as a Chinook takes line into the main current. It is the weight of a rainbow trout, heavy, bright, cold to the touch, held briefly before it kicks free and vanishes into glacial green water. Alaska does not offer a manicured fishing experience. It offers something rarer, an honest one. But Alaska's cold water ecosystems are not invulnerable. They face threats both familiar and unprecedented, and the consequences of failure here extend far beyond the state's borders. The collapse of Chinook and chum salmon in the Yukon River, the third longest river in North America and home to the longest inland Pacific salmon migration in the world, stands as a stark warning. Returns that once numbered in the hundreds of thousands have fallen by more than 80%. In 2021 and 2022, runs dwindled so low that the Alaska Department of Fish and Game closed the fishery entirely, including subsistence fishing, for the first time in memory. In 2024, Alaskan and Canadian authorities imposed a 7-year moratorium on Chinook fishing across the entire Yukon drainage. Fish camps that sustained families for generations now sit empty. Smoking racks stand bare. A way of life measured in millennia has been interrupted. The causes are multiple and interacting. Rising water temperatures, driven by a changing climate, have stressed cold water species throughout the state. A marine heat wave in the Bering Sea during 2018 and 2019 disrupted the ocean feeding grounds of juvenile salmon. The parasitic infection ichthyophilus, found in increasing numbers of returning Chinook, damages hard tissue and muscle, killing fish before they can reach their spawning grounds. Commercial bycatch. Salmon caught incidentally in the massive Bering Sea pollock trawl fishery removes tens of thousands of fish that would otherwise return to their rivers. Meanwhile, in Bristol Bay, where the salmon still run in record numbers, the threat has taken a different form. The proposed Pebble Mine, which would have created the largest open-pit mine in North America at the headwaters of the Kvichak and Nushagak rivers, was fought for over 2 decades by a coalition of Alaska Native tribes, commercial fishermen, sport anglers, conservationists, and local business owners. The Environmental Protection Agency ultimately blocked the mine under the Clean Water Act. But the mineral deposits remain, and multiple exploration proposals continue to test the boundaries of the bay's protection. The Bristol Bay example offers both caution and hope. It demonstrates that organized, sustained advocacy can protect critical habitat. It proves that indigenous communities, when empowered, are the most effective stewards of the resources they have managed for centuries. And it reminds the world that some ecosystems are simply worth more intact than extracted. Across the state, the framework for conservation exists. Alaska's constitution mandates sustainable management of natural resources. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game employs some of the most rigorous stock assessment and escapement monitoring systems in the world. Sonar stations count returning fish with precision. Weirs on tributary streams track spawning populations in real time. Catch and release regulations protect trophy trout in key drainages, like the Kvichak and its tributaries. The sheer remoteness of much of the state provides a natural buffer that most fisheries in the lower 48 lost long ago. Yet the contrast between Bristol Bay's abundance and the Yukon's crisis illustrates a fundamental truth about cold water fisheries. Even the most resilient systems can reach a tipping point. And once a run collapses, once the fish that carry the genetic map of a particular river cease to return, that specific population may never recover. The diversity that makes Alaska's salmon so resilient is also what makes each loss irreplaceable. A sockeye run adapted to one tributary is not interchangeable with a run adapted to another. Each is the product of thousands of years of natural selection, fine-tuned to the temperature, the flow, the gravel composition of its home water. But remoteness is not immunity. Climate change does not respect geography. And the pressure on wild places, from mining, from development, from a warming planet, only grows. Somewhere in the Bristol Bay drainage, at this very moment, a sockeye salmon is holding in current it has traveled 2,000 miles of ocean to reach. Its body has already begun to change, silver fading to red, jaw curving into the hooked kype of a spawning male. In a few days, it will deposit its eggs in the same gravel where it was born, and then it will die. Its body will feed the river. The nutrients it carried from the Pacific will enter the soil, the trees, the insects, the trout. And when spring comes, its offspring will emerge from the gravel, begin the long journey downstream, and disappear into the sea, carrying with them the genetic memory of a specific river, a specific bend, a specific handful of cold Alaskan gravel. This cycle has repeated for 10,000 years. It has survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions, and the worst of human excess. Whether it survives what comes next depends not on the fish. They will do what they have always done, but on whether the waters they depend on remain cold, clean, and connected. Alaska holds those waters. For now they hold.